in New South Wales, Gladys Berejiklian, the New South Wales Premier, she kind of said the quiet bit out loud. Now, there's all the obvious reaction that you have when somebody talks about pork barrelling as, oh, well, that's what it happens. You go, hang on, that's pretty outrageous. Then there's the other part of you that says, well, you have an expectation that when Team Red is in charge, if they can push a bit in Team Red's way, they will. If Team Blue's in charge, I mean, that's kind of the spoils of winning, right? But again, Berejiklian was asked about it today, and here's what she said.
I think what I said was, if you want to accuse us of making decisions about being specific about where we direct dollars, well, I don't know any public figure who hasn't made a decision about where to direct dollars. It's just, and the reason why I was very direct about that sentence was because the public knows that too. You make election commitments, you make commitments to particular areas. I mean, it would have been dishonest for me to say otherwise.
So, Barnaby, again, there's part of me that there's all the obvious reactions we're supposed to have when somebody talks positively about pork barrelling, and then there's all the logical stuff, which is, yeah, that's the consequences of one team winning.
Well, I mean, if we didn't have so-called pork barrelling, you wouldn't have the inland rail. I got $10 billion to spend on inland Australia. There's only a couple of seats that went through. But you see, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you only spend money where the people are, then you'll have one city in Australia called Sydney. It'll have about 20 million people living in it. It'll have all the lower house seats, and apart from the senators who'll be living in other towns in other states, it'll have all the senators. We have this ridiculous situation now where 11 out of 12 senators in Perth live in Western Australia live in Perth. 11 out of 12 live in Adelaide, 11 out of 12 live in Melbourne, 11 out of 12 live in Sydney or surrounds. All the lower house seats are there. Yet when we spend money in that tiny geographic area, that's completely legit and okay. If we spend money outside that area, that's pork barrelling. Well, I can tell you right now, if you don't do a bit of pork barrelling to try and spread the demographics of our nation in a wider sort of area, then we're going to have a nightmare of a nation. What Gladys said there, I back her in 100%. A leader has got to be discerning and say, if I'm just going to rely on the bureaucrats to say where the internal rate of return is where I spend the money, then we're going to have like people living in the dark ages about an hour and a half away from the centre of Sydney. I mean, you just can't do that. You've got to make sure you grow the nation, not just the town.
Yeah, I mean, Nicholas, this is part of when we elect whomever at whatever level of government, we give them a level of custodianship and a level of decision-making here. But the reason I say I'm 50-50 about it is that it was pretty obvious that when the sports minister in Queensland's moving things around, he's doing so for direct electoral benefit just before an election. This was something that was very closely timed in and around the New South Wales election. But again, once you sort of move out of election timings, the argument she's making, she's either trying to sort of scandal-proof herself into the future, saying, I've been hiding in plain sight the whole time, or she's trying to move the chat on from what's kind of been a bit of a 101 for political journalism to go, aha, I gotcha.
Yeah, look, I suspect the New South Wales Premier, if she had a time again, would express the idea a little differently to how she did it. And look, I think all of us who follow politics closely get the point she was trying to make. But at the end of the day, you know, we hope that our taxpayer money gets allocated to those areas which need it. And so if there's a case that can be made that a regional area needs the money, well, it should absolutely get it. But and I also agree with the idea that politicians should be the final decision makers on these things, and they should have the agency and have the ability to allocate funds. But there needs to be some system to it. There needs to be some provable need behind it. There needs to be an evidence base behind the allocation of these funds, because as you've alluded to, if there's not, then very quickly you'll have politicians just allocating money not based on need, but on vote calculations and how they can secure themselves electoral office. And ultimately, Australia ends up the poorer if we allow that to happen.